The sunset burned low over the plains of Xander, bleeding amber and crimson across the jagged horizon. James Oliver stood outside his workshop, the rag in his hand streaked with black grease, his gaze distant as the twin moons began their slow ascent. The settlement of Nextera sprawled like a stubborn scar across the desert, its ramshackle structures patched with salvaged metal and stubborn pride. James had made his home at the edge of it all, far enough from the noise of its crowded alleys to feel alone, close enough that no one could accuse him of abandoning it outright. The locals called him the human hermit, and James had never bothered to correct them. Solitude was simpler. Machines were simpler. Inside, the hover transport engine he had been working on still purred, a rare triumph in a world where scavenged parts often gave more grief than reward. He stretched the ache from his shoulders, muttering a half-hearted compliment to himself when the ground shuddered beneath his boots. The sound rolled at a heartbeat later, an explosion carried on the wind, sharp enough to scatter the evening birds from their roosts. James froze, rag dangling in his fingers. His head turned instinctively toward the east. Smoke curled upward in a thick black column from the direction of Krell, a neighboring settlement not 20 miles away. He grabbed his battered binoculars from a hook by the door, lifted them, and felt his chest tighten. Sleek silhouettes prowled the sky above Kreldravak warships, unmistakable in their predatory design. Even at this distance, their presence radiated menace, like carrion birds circling a battlefield. Rumors of raids had drifted across the frontier for weeks, but James had dismissed them as someone else's nightmare. Tonight, the nightmare had crossed the desert. He should run. Pack his bike, load a crate of tools and rations, vanish before Krell's ashes cooled. That was the rational choice, the smart choice. But as he lowered the binoculars, movement on the horizon caught his eye. A figure, stumbling, swaying, dragging itself forward with desperate determination. James squinted, wiping dust from the lenses, and his heart lurched. Not just a traveler woman. Blue-skinned, armored, staggering beneath a burden, she clutched to her chest dot by the time she reached his workshop. Her steps had collapsed into a crawl. James dropped the rag and rushed forward, catching her as her knees gave way. She was Xandrian, though her features bore the finer lines of something older, rarer. Blood-dark indigo streaked the leather of her armor. Her breathing rattled like a broken bellows, but her arms remained locked around the small bundle she carried. "Please," she gasped, lifting her face to his. Her eyes, deep sapphire, shimmered with tears. "Human man, save my baby." She peeled back the cloth with trembling fingers, revealing the tiny face of an infant. Blue-skinned like her, fragile, impossibly small, yet serene, as though untouched by the chaos that had ravaged Krell. James's throat closed. He could fix engines, patch hulls, even rig water recyclers with spare wires, but a child? A newborn? This was no task for him. "I'll get help," he said, already feeling the lie in the words. His hands hovered, unwilling to take the bundle. No time. She shoved the infant into his arms with startling strength. The warmth of the child bled through his shirt, shocking him more than the weight itself. Her name, Liana. "Promise me. You'll protect her." James's instincts screamed to protest. He knew nothing of raising children, nothing of alien needs. He'd built his life on refusing ties, avoiding burdens too heavy to carry. But her gaze anchored him. Raw desperation. A mother's love condensed into a single impossible plea. He swallowed hard, but the words came anyway. "I promise." Relief broke across her face, fragile and fleeting. She fumbled at her throat, drawing a pendant from beneath her torn armor, a disk of strange metal, etched with symbols that seemed to shift when caught by the fading light. She pressed it into his free hand, her fingers icy and unyielding. "Keep this with her. When the time comes, she'll need it. Her strength ebbed with those words. Her hand slid from his wrist, her breath stilled, her eyes fixed on him for one last instant before the light within them faded. Silence swallowed the desert, broken only by the faint, steady breaths of the child in his arms. James knelt in the dust, frozen between grief and disbelief. The pendant cold in his palm, the newborn pressed against his chest. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he looked down. The baby stirred, eyelids fluttering open. Her gaze locked onto his eyes of pure silver, gleaming with a knowing light that no infant should possess. James Oliver, the man who had spent his life building walls against the world, felt them crack in that instant. The promise he had spoken out of pity rooted itself deeper than he expected. He drew a shaky breath, clutching Liana close. "All right, kid," he whispered. "Looks like it's just you and me now." The wind swept over the plains, carrying the smoke of Krell. But within the workshop's shadow, a bond had already been forged, one that would shatter the quiet life James had built, and drag him into a future far larger than he ever dared imagine. The first night nearly broke him. James had faced plasma fire, shipboard decompressions, and the slow crawl of starvation on half-dead outposts, but nothing had prepared him for the fragile fury of an infant. Liana refused to rest. Her cries cut through the walls of the workshop, high-pitched and unearthly, rattling inside his skull until his hands trembled. He paced the narrow floorboards with her, pressed against his chest, whispering half-remembered lullabies from childhood, cursing himself for agreeing to a promise that already felt impossible to keep dot by dawn. His eyes were ringed in shadows. He'd fashioned a crib from a storage bin, lined it with shop rags, but the baby wouldn't stay in it more than a few minutes before wailing as though the universe itself were unraveling. Machines, he thought bitterly, never did this. Machines never stared at you with accusing silver eyes, demanding something you couldn't understand. "Food," he muttered at last, his voice hoarse. "You've got to need food." He rifled through his shelves, cursing at the rows of lubricants, power cells, and scrap wiring. Nothing remotely edible, certainly not for a newborn. He slammed the cabinet shut, heart pounding. To feed her, he'd have to go into the market. And if word spread, as it always did, questions would follow. Questions he wasn't ready to answer. Still, the alternative was unthinkable. He pulled on his jacket, cut an old shirt into strips, and fashioned a crude sling. Liana fit against his chest, tiny and warm, her breath soft against his collarbone. James pulled a cloth over her to shield her from prying eyes, and muttered, "Quiet now. Just an hour. That's all we need." The market was already alive with noise when he arrived. Vendors barked prices from behind crooked stalls. Refugees from Krell huddled in alleys, their belongings stacked in pitiful bundles. The scent of charred spice bread and overheated metal clogged the air. James kept his head down, but he felt eyes track him, the human mechanic with the solitary habits suddenly among the crowd. He approached a stall piled high with dried roots, herbs, and vials of nectar. Behind it stood Mora, the old Xandrian herbalist whose face was creased like worn leather. Her sapphire skin had dulled with age, but her gaze remained sharp enough to cut. "Mora," he greeted, forcing his tone into casual ease. "I need something for an infant." The woman's eyes narrowed, lingering on the bundle pressed against his chest. "You've taken to babysitting, human?" "Something like that." Her gaze hardened. "The child from Krell." James stiffened. "What do you know about it?" "Rumors spread faster than Dravik fire," Mora said, lowering her voice. "They say the raiders were not searching for wealth, but for bloodlines. For someone." Before James could reply, Liana squirmed and let out a soft, plaintive whimper. The sound seemed to strike Mora like a physical blow. She hissed and gestured sharply. Inside, quickly. He followed her into a cramped storage room, the smell of dried herbs overwhelming. Mora shut the door and turned, her hands trembling as she pulled back the cloth from Liana's face. "By the moons," she whispered. Her blue fingers hovered an inch above the baby's cheeks, reverent as though touching a relic. Those eyes, silver, like the ancients. James shifted uneasily. "Can you help me feed her or not?" The old woman blinked, as though waking from a trance. She bustled to a shelf, gathering vials. "Dilute this nectar with water. It will sustain her for now." She pressed the vial of golden liquid into his palm, her hands lingering. "But James, this child, she is no ordinary Xandrian." He exhaled sharply. "I figured that much. The pendant," Mora said suddenly. "Her mother gave you something, didn't she?" James hesitated, then drew the disc from his pocket. The symbols gleamed faintly, as though alive under the dim light. Mora's expression tightened. "As I thought," she murmured. "This is a map. Coordinates to the Temple of Ascension." James frowned. "A temple? You're telling me this is religious junk?" "Not junk," Mora snapped. "The temple holds the legacy of the Luminari. A bloodline older than the Xandrians, you know. Keepers of knowledge. And power. That child carries their blood. That is why the Dravik hunter." James tucked the pendant back into his pocket, suddenly protective. "Power? She's a baby. Power waits in blood." Mora said grimly. A commotion outside cut her words short. Shouts, the sharp arc of authority. Mora peered through a crack in the door, her face draining of color. "Commonwealth patrols. Military division. They're questioning everyone about survivors." James's stomach turned. He knew the Commonwealth's idea of protection. Efficient, clinical, merciless. "They'll take her," Mora warned, her voice shaking. "For study. She will become their property." James adjusted the sling, heart thudding as Liana's small body pressed closer to him. "Is there another way out?" Mora pointed to a narrow back door. "Go. I will delay them." He hesitated. "Why help me?" A shadow of grief crossed her weathered face. "My sister married a Luminari once. The Commonwealth took their children. We never saw them again." The weight of her words settled over him. James slipped out the back, hugging the shadows of the alleys until the din of the patrols faded behind him. Back at the workshop, Liana drank greedily from the diluted nectar, her small hands gripping his finger with surprising strength. James stared at her, exhaustion pressing down like lead. "What have I gotten myself into, kid?" He murmured. Her silver eyes lifted to meet his, clear and unsettlingly aware. And for an instant, James swore he felt something stir inside him, an echo not his own. A flicker of trust, a whisper of belonging. He tightened his hold. "Don't worry. I won't let them take you." The words came easily, almost natural, and James realized with a jolt that the promise he had made was no longer just duty. It was becoming truth. The knock at the workshop door was sharp, deliberate, nothing like the timid tapping of customers or the hurried fists of patrolmen. James froze mid-step. Liana balanced awkwardly against his shoulder. Through the peephole he caught a flash of sapphire skin, dark hair woven with silver beads that glinted in the morning light. Not Commonwealth uniforms. Not Dravak armor. When he cracked the door open, she was waiting tall, graceful, and far too composed for someone walking the edge of a war zone. Her emerald eyes locked onto his with unnerving precision. "Are you James Oliver?" she asked, her voice carrying a musical cadence that didn't match her hard gaze. "Depends who's asking," James said, his grip tightening around the wrench in his free hand. Her lips curved, not quite a smile. "My name is Nerea. I believe you have something of mine." As if on cue, Liana stirred and let out a soft wail beneath the cloth. Naria's expression shifted, triumph flashing in her eyes. My niece, she said simply. May I come in? James hesitated. His instinct screamed to slam the door, to vanish into the desert before another stranger could lay claim to the child. But outside, the air hummed with danger. He'd heard the patrols sweeping closer each day, door to door, methodical. If she was right, if Liana truly was family. He stepped aside. Nerea crossed the threshold without hesitation, moving with a predator's grace. Her eyes went straight to the covered crib in the corner. She pulled back the cloth, and her entire posture softened. She knelt, her hand hovering above the infant's cheek, reverence etched across her features. Thera's daughter, she whispered. She looks just like her. James's jaw tightened. Thera was her mother? Nerea nodded, scooping Liana into her arms with practiced ease. The baby quieted instantly, reaching for the silver beads in Naria's hair. The sight struck James like a gut punch. How natural the fit looked, woman and child, connected by blood. My sister, Nerea confirmed. We were separated during the attack. I've been searching for 3 days. She glanced at him, eyes sharp again. You buried her properly? Yes, behind the workshop. Marked it with stones. Something flickered in her gaze. Respect, perhaps. Thank you. Many humans wouldn't bother with Xandrian rites. James shifted, still gripping the wrench, as if it might keep the world from tilting further beneath his feet. I didn't know your customs. But everyone deserves dignity. Her emerald eyes lingered on him, steady, probing. Thera chose well, she murmured. She always had good instincts about people. The words hit him harder than expected. He set the wrench down, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Look, I don't know what's going on, but Thera gave me something, a pendant. Said it was important. Nerea's gaze sharpened instantly. The star map. To the Temple of Ascension. So it's real. It's more than real. It's the only safe place left for Liana. The temple is hidden, shielded, protected even from the Dravik. We have to get her there. James bristled. We? I've been taking care of her since her mother died. I'm not just handing her over to the first stranger who shows up claiming blood ties. Nerea stood, Liana balanced easily against her hip. Her posture was regal, her voice low and certain. You've grown attached to her. He hated how easily she'd seen it. She's not just some job to me, he muttered. But I promised her mother I'd protect her. That doesn't mean I trust you. You shouldn't, Nerea said, surprising him. Not yet. Trust must be earned. But if you truly want to protect her, you'll come with me. The Crimson Wastes are dangerous, more so with a child. Alone, you won't last a week. With me, she has a chance. Her words lodged in his chest like shrapnel. He'd spent years building walls, swearing off entanglements, surviving on skill and solitude. And yet here he was, a baby's tiny hands tugging at his defenses, a woman with eyes like polished emerald, daring him to step beyond them. What if this is just another trap? He asked. Nerea tilted her head, studying him. If it were, you'd already be dead. The silence between them stretched. Finally, James exhaled, slow and heavy, the fight draining from his shoulders. He looked at Liana, silver eyes half closed in Naria's arms, and knew the truth. He couldn't walk away, not anymore. Fine, he said. But we do this my way. At dawn, we leave for the wastes. I'll get the supplies. You keep her safe. Naria's lips curved, faint and dangerous, like the edge of a blade catching sunlight. Agreed. As she settled Liana back into the crib, the baby reached out, her tiny fingers grasping at the air. James stepped closer without thinking, and her hand found his, clutching with surprising strength. Naria's hand brushed his in the exchange, warm and soft against his calloused skin. She knows you, Nerea murmured, watching the infant's grip. Luminary children form bonds quickly. The contact lingered, a spark leaping between them in the quiet workshop. James swallowed, heat crawling up the back of his neck. He had no words for it, not yet. But as the baby's silver eyes looked up at him, he realized his promise had just grown heavier. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure he minded. The desert opened before them like a sea of rust-colored waves, dunes rolling under a sky washed pale by the suns. James guided the hoverbike across the open plain, the machine growling beneath him, its frame rattling against the wind. Behind him, Nerea sat with one arm cinched around his waist and the other cradling Liana in her carrier. The baby seemed strangely unbothered by the harsh ride, her silver eyes darting at the horizon as though the shifting sand held secrets only she could see. By midday, the heat pressed down like a hammer. James pulled the bike into the shadow of a jagged ridge to rest the engine. Sand hissed beneath their boots as he climbed off, stretching the stiffness from his back. Nerea followed, settling onto a smooth rock with Liana nestled against her chest. For the first time since they had left Nextora, silence fell between them without the press of urgency. James busied himself with the bike, checking filters and recalibrating the coolant system, but his eyes kept sliding toward her. The way the wind caught the silver beads in her hair, the soft murmur of the lullaby she sang, a melody unlike anything he had heard haunting, resonant as though the desert itself was listening. Liana cooed in response, small fingers clutching at the fabric of Nerea's bodysuit. "You handle her well," James said finally, surprising himself with the softness of his tone. Nerea glanced up, emerald eyes catching his. "I was raised in a family of many sisters. Caring for little ones is not unfamiliar." She shifted Liana gently. "But she responds to you in a way I did not expect. Most luminary infants are wary of other species." James gave a short, humorless laugh. "Maybe she knows I'm her ticket off this rock." But even as he said it, he felt the lie in his chest. The child curled against him as though he were more than chance and circumstance. The quiet did not last. A low hum trembled through the sand, mechanical and unmistakable. James stiffened. He knew that sound, a predatory thrum of Dravik scout engines. "Move," he barked, snatching up his pulse rifle from the bike's saddle. Nerea was already on her feet, her grace sharpened into urgency. She doused the small fire they had built for shade and pressed Liana close. Together, they ducked into the ravine that split the ridge, the narrow path funneling them between towering walls of red stone. The hum grew louder, engines sweeping the sky above, their shadows cutting across the gorge floor like blades. James led them into a fissure in the cliff, barely wide enough to squeeze through. The passage opened into a hollow chamber, dark and cool, shielded from sensors. He flicked the light stick to life, casting the cavern in a soft blue glow. Liana stirred, but did not cry. Her silver eyes blinked, wide and unafraid, reflecting the glow like twin mirrors. James crouched, rifle angled toward the mouth of the cave. Outside, the Dravik ships prowled, scanning, searching. The rumble of their engines shook dust from the ceiling. Nerea stood close, too close in the narrow space, her breath quick and even. She held Liana against her shoulder, but her gaze was on James, watching the way he moved, the way his eyes never left the entrance. "You move like a soldier," she said quietly. "Old habits," he muttered, finger brushing the trigger, "and old scars." Her voice lowered. "Not just in your body. Here." She touched her chest lightly. James glanced at her, meeting her eyes in the dim glow. The air between them shifted, charged with something that had nothing to do with the Dravik outside. He became acutely aware of her warmth, the faint scent of dust and spice clinging to her skin, the way her lips curved even in tension. "Luminari have a saying," she whispered. "Danger awakens all senses." Her free hand lifted, fingertips brushing his chest above his heart. To the fabric of his shirt, He felt her touch like fire. "Is that why yours beats so fast, James?" He swallowed hard. Not entirely. Her mouth curved into the faintest smile. The cave seemed to shrink, the silence between the thrum of engines thick with heat. Then her lips met his, warm and insistent, alien and yet achingly familiar. James responded without thought, his hand sliding to her waist, pulling her closer. The kiss deepened, tasted of risk and inevitability. For a moment, the world outside, the warships, the temple, the promise fell away. There was only the rhythm of breath, the heat of skin, the undeniable spark of two souls who should never have crossed paths but had. A roar overhead snapped him back. Engines passed directly above, shaking the cavern walls. James broke the kiss, chest heaving, rifle still gripped tight. Naria's eyes gleamed in the dim light. Her lips curved with something both dangerous and tender. "They're gone," she murmured, after a tense stretch of silence. Not for long. His voice came out rough, half from adrenaline, half from what had just passed between them. Liana shifted between them, her tiny hand brushing both their arms as if claiming them in equal measure. James looked at the child, then at Naria, and felt a line inside him, cross a threshold he had sworn he would never approach. Whatever this journey was, it was no longer just about survival. It was about bonds forged in fire, about promises that were no longer reluctant but chosen. And in the stillness of the cave, with danger fading into the night, James Oliver knew there would be no turning back. Port Helios rose from the horizon like a mirage forged of glass and steel, its domes gleaming in the relentless sun. James guided the hoverbike toward the sprawling gates, the vehicle's engine rattling from the strain of desert miles. Behind him, Naria's arm circled his waist with quiet steadiness. Liana swaddled in the sling across her chest. The moment they entered the outer market district, chaos swallowed them. Port Helios was no frontier outpost. It was a crossroads of species and allegiances. Vexillian merchants with 6 arms haggled beside insectoid traders who clicked out prices in staccato bursts. Humans barked offers from stalls stacked with rusting tech, while Xandrian children darted underfoot, hands quick as shadows. The air smelled of hot metal, spiced oils, and the faint tang of fuel exhaust. James kept his head low, steering the bike carefully through the streets. He hated crowds. Too many eyes, too many ears. And after the ravine, after the kiss that still lingered like a brand, he hated how his pulse jumped each time Naria's body brushed against his back. "We'll need supplies," he muttered over his shoulder. "Water recyclers, rations, desert gear. The Crimson Wastes won't forgive a mistake." "I know someone who can provide what we need," Naria said. Her tone was calm, but he didn't miss the way her eyes scanned the crowd like a predator searching for threats. "A trader at the Cantina Azora. He deals in information as much as goods." James raised an eyebrow. "You've been here before." "Many times." A faint smile ghosted her lips. "The Luminari are not always cloistered scholars hiding in temples. They secured lodging in a narrow inn that catered to off-worlders, its owner a Scard." Vexillian barely glancing at Liana, as if infants were just another commodity among the galaxy's endless trade. The room was small, a single divider providing the illusion of privacy. James set down his pack, checked the locks twice, then crouched by the crib he had cobbled together from scavenged containers. Liana gurgled up at him, her tiny fingers curling around his thumb with surprising strength. He should have felt out of place. A soldier turned mechanic, saddled with an alien child and her enigmatic guardian. Yet when he glanced at Naria, who was humming softly as she adjusted the baby's sling, he felt something uncomfortably close to belonging. "I'll make contact with my source," Naria said, straightening. "You should rest. You've been driving for 2 days without pause." James shook his head, feigning nonchalance. "The bike needs work." Dust storm chewed up the filters. In truth, he needed space to breathe, to think, to shake the memory of her lips in the cave. He slipped into the maintenance bay behind the inn. Tools in hand, he lost himself in the familiar ritual of cleaning filters, tightening bolts, recalibrating the coolant system. The hum of mechanics always calmed him. Metal never lied. You always did have a gift with engines. The voice froze him. James turned slowly, pulse rifle within reach, until his eyes found a tall, dark-skinned man leaning against the doorway. His leather jacket bore a faded Alliance insignia, the kind James had sworn never to wear again. A scar ran from temple to jaw, twisting his grin into something wolfish. "Nick," James said, the word both greeting and warning. Nick Harvey pushed off the frame, striding closer with easy confidence. "Didn't expect to find you on this rock. Last I heard you were running salvage jobs along the Orion Belt. People hear a lot of things." James replied carefully. Nick's gaze slid to the bike, then to the faint sound of Liana's cry drifting through the thin walls. His grin faded. "You've picked up some company. Interesting company." James's jaw tightened. "You've been watching me." "Watching out for you," Nick corrected, sliding into a crouch beside the bike. His eyes were sharp, calculating. "And wondering if you realize who you're traveling with." James said nothing. Nick leaned closer, lowering his voice. "She's not who she claims to be. Naria Lex, Keeper, high-ranking in the isolationist faction. The kind that would sacrifice their own blood before letting humans touch luminary secrets." James kept his face unreadable, though his stomach turned. "And you know this how?" "Because I've been tracking Dravik movements for Alliance intelligence. The Keepers and the Dravak are playing the same game, different sides of the board." "And that pendant you're carrying?" His eyes hardened. "It doesn't just lead to a sanctuary. It's a key to weapons that could shift the balance of the entire sector." The weight of the pendant in James's pockets seemed to grow heavier, pressing against his ribs. He thought of Naria's touch, of the trust in her eyes, of the kiss in the cave. Had it been real? Or calculated? "Be careful, James," Nick said, straightening. "Beautiful alien women with secret agenda's oldest trap in the book." He slid a small data chip across the workbench. "Secure route through the wastes. And this," he pressed a compact metallic disc into James's hand. "Emergency beacon. If things go sideways, trigger it. I'll come running." James pocketed both. "Why help me?" Nick's grin returned, sharp but weary. "Because you saved my ass on Titan's moon. And because, whatever else you are, you're human. We look out for our own." He left without another word. James stood in the quiet, the hum of the bike filling the silence. His thoughts were a storm. Naria's voice trust must be earned. Nick's warning, "She use you." Liana's silver eyes, impossibly aware, watching him as though she knew he was deciding her future. When he finally returned to the room, Naria was rocking Liana gently, humming a lullaby. The scene looked fragile, almost domestic. She glanced up, emerald eyes unreadable. "You were gone a while," she said. "Ran into an old friend," James answered. His voice was calm, but inside, the weight of choice pressed down like iron. Because now he had to decide, trust the woman whose lips had stolen his breath, or the comrade whose warnings rang like gunfire in his ears. The crimson wastes stretched endless before them, dunes of rust-colored sand rolling into a horizon, jagged with black stone spires. The heat shimmered off the ground, bending the air itself. James hunched over the handlebars of the hoverbike, sweat soaking his shirt as he pushed the machine harder than he should have. Behind him, Naria's arm circled his waist in steady balance, her other hand cradling Liana in the sling strapped across her chest. The child blinked at the desert as if it were a page in a book only she could read, silver eyes glinting in the harsh light. "We're close," Nerea called over the engine's growl. Her voice carried a note he hadn't heard before, something like reverence. "The temple lies just beyond the ridge." James squinted at the horizon. Rising out of the amphitheater of stone ahead was a structure that didn't belong to this world. Arches curved against the laws of weight, spires twisted like frozen fire. Even at a distance, the Temple of Ascension looked less like it, had been built, and more like it, had been summoned. A flicker of light caught his eye, metallic, moving. He cursed under his breath and veered the bike behind an outcrop of stone. Through the scanner on the dash, 3 blips materialized. Military grade, coming fast from the east. Commonwealth, he muttered. Then the scanner pinged again, new signatures sweeping in from the south. Andravik, perfect. Naria's grip tightened on his waist. "We have to reach the temple. Its defenses will protect us, but only if we're inside." James pushed the bike forward, the engine screaming as it climbed toward red stone ridges. Sand erupted in plumes behind them. A Commonwealth vessel swooped overhead, firing a warning shot that blasted a crater into the dunes. Liana whimpered at the sound, and James felt something primal stir in his chest. "They're trying to capture, not kill," he growled. Small comfort. Another blip appeared on the scanner, cutting in fast from the west. James braced for the worst until the vessel dived between them and the pursuers, deploying flares and countermeasures. It wasn't painted with Commonwealth or Dravak insignia. James recognized the silhouette instantly. "Nick," he said through clenched teeth, unable to stop the grin tugging at his mouth. The temple loomed larger now. Its sealed entrance towered above them, carved with the same symbols etched into the pendant that burned cold in James's pocket. He skidded the bike to a halt, helping Nerea down before drawing his rifle. "The pendant," she urged, nodding toward the enormous stone door. James pulled it out, pressed it into the central depression. Nothing. "It needs both bloodlines," Nerea realized. She took his hand, pressing his palm against the pendant, then guided Liana's tiny fingers over theirs. The effect was immediate. Lines of light spiraled outward, racing across the carved symbols until the whole doorway blazed. With a low groan, the entrance parted, exhaling a rush of cool air from within. "Inside," Nerea urged. They darted through as the temple sealed behind them, shutting out the thunder of battle. The interior was vast, corridors lined with stone that pulsed faintly as though alive. Bioluminescent panels lit as they passed, guiding them deeper until they stepped into a chamber that stole James's breath. A circular hall opened above them, crowned by a holographic projection of the galaxy itself, stars spinning in slow rotation. Naria's eyes shone in the glow. "The repository," she whispered. "All that was lost, preserved here." James approached the dais at the center. As he stepped onto it, the projection shifted, narrowing until a single star system floated before him. Earth, rendered in luminous detail. "It recognizes you?" Nerea murmured. "Your heritage." The floor trembled under their feet, an explosion echoing from outside. James's jaw tightened. "They're breaking through." Nerea laid Liana carefully in a cradle of light that formed from the dais, then began working at the console that blossomed out of the air. The temple holds more than history. It holds technology, designed by humans and Luminari together before the war. The projection shifted again, resolving into schematics of a device unlike anything James had seen. A lattice of energy coils, pulse emitters, harmonic nodes. "This isn't a weapon," she said quickly, anticipating his suspicion. "It neutralizes aggression. A pacification array, never completed before the war destroyed the Alliance." Her fingers danced over the symbols, downloading streams of data. Another explosion shook the chamber, closer this time. Dust rained from the ceiling. James spun toward the door, rifle raised. "We don't have long. I need more time," Nerea snapped, her voice taut with urgency. James cursed, then handed her liana. "Keep working. I'll buy it." He sprinted back down the corridor, heart hammering. At the entrance, the stone shuddered under repeated impacts. Cracks of light formed at the edges. James planted his boots, rifle aimed, ready to defend the only family he had left. The door split just enough to admit a figure. James's finger tightened on the trigger until he saw the scorched leather jacket, the scarred grin. Nick stumbled inside, bleeding from a cut along his forehead. "Cutting it close, aren't you?" James said, lowering his rifle. "You know me," Nick panted. Always making an entrance. His eyes swept the chamber, widening at the galaxy hovering in the air. "Tell me you found something worth all this trouble." James nodded. "We did." Together they hurried back, where Nerea cradled Liana and lines of code streamed into a glowing cube. Outside, the thunder of engines grew deafening. James knew the doors wouldn't hold much longer. "What's your play, Oliver?" Nick asked grimly. James looked at the infant, then at Nerea, then at the holographic Earth suspended above them. "We don't keep it. We share it. With everyone." Nerea lifted her gaze to his, surprise and something warmer sparking in her emerald eyes. "Then we'd better prove it works." She held out a small prototype she'd pulled from the console, no larger than a lantern. The pacification device hummed with dormant power. She pressed it into his hands. "Both bloodlines," she said. James nodded, placed his hand over it. Nerea pressed hers alongside, then gently guided Liana's tiny fingers to rest on the surface. The device flared to life, light erupting in concentric rings that surged outward through the temple walls. Outside, the battlefield fell silent. Commonwealth and Dravek ships froze mid-strike, their weapons powered down, engines stilled as if the will to fight had been stripped away. "It works," Nerea whispered, awe and relief in her voice. James exhaled, tension bleeding from his shoulders. For the first time since Krell burned, he felt the weight of the promise shift, no longer a burden, but the beginning of something greater. But as the rumble of distant ships echoed back into the silence, he knew this was only the start. The galaxy would not give up its wars so easily. And he, a solitary mechanic who once wanted nothing but solitude, had just stepped into the center of a storm. The temple's great chamber still pulsed with light from the pacification array, its hum lingering in the bones of everyone present. James stood on the dais, rifle hanging loose in his hand, eyes fixed on the silver waves spreading through the holographic galaxy above him. Outside, silence blanketed the battlefield. No blasts, no screaming engines, no thunder of weapons. Only the eerie quiet of fleets stripped of their rage. Nick leaned against a support pillar, breathing hard, blood still trickling down his temple. "Hell of a trick," he said, his voice low with a mix of awe and unease. "Stopped an entire battle cold. But how long does it last?" "Not long," Nerea answered, adjusting Liana in her arms. The infant blinked, utterly calm, her tiny silver eyes glowing faintly in the temple's light. "Minutes at most. But it proved the device works. That is enough." James's gaze hardened. "Then we use that proof. Not as a weapon, but as leverage." The sound of boots echoed from the corridors. James and Nick raised their rifles, but Nerea lifted a hand. "They've come to talk. The temple's defenses won't allow open conflict inside its walls." She was right. Commonwealth officers entered first, armor gleaming under the pale light, their faces stiff with suspicion. Dravak emissaries followed, their reptilian eyes flicking warily between James and the luminary inscriptions that glowed on every surface. And then a pair of Alliance envoys strode in, their insignias sharp, Their expressions hard. The chamber grew heavy with tension. 3 rival powers forced into the same space, each coveting what they had just witnessed. James stepped forward, pulse rifle slung across his back, his voice carrying in the vaulted space. This technology doesn't belong to any of you. Not the Commonwealth, not the Alliance, not the Dravik. It was built by humans and Luminari together, meant to prevent bloodshed, not feed it. If you fight over it, you'll destroy it. And her, he gestured to Liana, who cooed softly in Naria's arms. The delegates shifted uneasily. The Dravik emissary hissed, "The child's blood is ours by right. Her DNA contains..." "Say it again," James cut in, his voice sharp as steel. "And I'll put you down before you finish the sentence." The silence that followed was brittle. Finally, a Commonwealth commander stepped forward, jaw tight. "And what do you propose, human?" "Joint stewardship," James said firmly. "The temple and its knowledge remain neutral ground. Shared. No one faction gets to hold it hostage. Not the raiders, not the bureaucrats, not even the Alliance." Nick gave him a long look, then exhaled. "Damn it, Oliver. You always did have a way of stepping into the fire." Hours passed in tense negotiation. Words like Oversight Council and treaty clauses filled the chamber. But beneath it all was the undeniable weight of what they had seen. Weapons silenced without blood. For the first time in decades, the idea of cooperation didn't feel like fantasy. By dawn, a fragile agreement was written in light across the dais. When the delegates departed under the temple's watchful glow, Nick lingered. He studied James with something between respect and worry. "You've gone from hermit mechanic to the man who just forced 3 superpowers to share a table. Not bad for a guy who used to hide in his workshop." James gave a weary half-smile. "Didn't plan on it." He glanced at Naria, who was adjusting Liana's blanket with tender precision. "But some things are worth it." Nick clapped his shoulder. "Alliance could use a voice like yours in this arrangement. Keep in touch. And try not to get yourself killed." With that, he strode out, disappearing into the desert light. The chamber quieted, leaving only the 3 of them beneath the galaxy's shifting projection. Liana reached out from her sling, fingers curling in the air until James stepped closer. She grasped his hand, her grip impossibly strong for her size. "She knows you," Naria said softly. Her emerald eyes caught his, holding something she had been keeping hidden. "There is more, James. Liana isn't only Luminari. Her grandmother was human. A scientist who fell in love with one of our own long before the war. Liana carries both bloodlines. And more than that, your bloodline. The markers in her DNA match yours. You are kin." The words landed like a blow. James stared at the child, seeing the faint echoes of familiar features he had ignored before. The curve of the jaw, the stubborn line of the brow. He remembered the way she had bonded with him instantly, how her silver eyes had seemed to look through him, not at him. It hadn't been chance. It had been recognition. His chest tightened. He had sworn never to carry attachments, never to shoulder burdens that couldn't be fixed with a wrench. And yet, here was a child who carried his blood, whose future was tied not only to him, but to the fragile hope of peace. Naria stepped closer, her hand brushing his. "Thera chose you for a reason. She trusted you with her life's legacy. And she hesitated, searching his eyes. "My feelings for you are not duty. They are real." James cupped her cheek, the warmth of her skin grounding him in a way machines never could. "Then maybe there's a future. For all of us." Outside, dawn spread gold across the wastes, bathing the temple's impossible spires in light. James held Liana close, Naria at his side, and for the first time he did not feel the pull of solitude. He felt the weight of family fragile, impossible. But his, the mechanic who had once hidden from the galaxy, now stood at its heart, bound by a promise that had become something greater. A new era was stirring, born of bloodlines mingled and a child's silver gaze. And James Oliver, against every instinct he had once lived by, knew he would fight for it until his last breath.